Okay, so when I filled out my registration for the event, I put on there, we really need a class on burnout for leads and board members, and got a note back saying, would you like to lead it? So here we are leading that. So you're welcome. So if you want to go to the next slide. So I'm Nurse Lancelot, or Holly Sprick. I'm the Lakes of Fire ESD medical co-lead, and Mac is going to also help with the presentation or participate with the presentation. So we'll do it together. So you'll get two different perspectives. You'll get my perspective and kind of his perspective and thought processes, and you can pick up which one kind of works for you. Just put some abbreviations down if we have guests that are not familiar with Lakes of Fire. It's a regional burn in Michigan, ESD, Emergency Service Department, which includes our fire, medical, and psychological care, DPW, Department of Public Works, and the BODOC, the board member of the day, or the BODOCs, or all the board members is kind of how we talk about them. So, okay. So overwork, what's it look like? Always on duty. You know, when I see people that are on duty 24/7, every time you step out of your tent, you see them buzzing by, always working, always have a radio, always have a golf cart, always have their shirt on, whatever that shirt color may be. They're definitely present for the event, but they really haven't participated in the burn. They are working all the time, so they don't seem to really become a participant at any point. And first of all of us are participants first. So it's really important to grasp that and to hold on to it, because it's sacred and it's special to be a participant at an event. You know, if you're overworked, a lot of times you get that way because you're jumping outside your lane. I have seen it too, where people feel like they deserve some privileges because, well, I've worked so hard, I deserve to cut in line at the shower, or I deserve to cut in this line, or I deserve to have this or have that. And that's just really, I feel like that's so contrary to the culture of what we want. One of the other things that happens is people will show up already tired because our leads and board members have worked their tails off before the event even starts, and you know, figuring out how to carve out that time to get your sleep and your rest so you actually show up you know, feeling rested before the event starts. Also, you know, when people start telling me they just dread the burn cycle, and I've heard people say that I dread the burn cycle, and I'm like, ooh, that it's like, what can we do to make that not happen? Because that's a bad feeling, and we don't need good leaders burning out. So reasons why I think burnout happens, overwork occurs, is when you're starting a new program. So starting a new program, team, or service really takes a lot of energy and time. And I think that, you know, you have some people who will have a vision, and getting everybody else on board with that vision is really important to move the team forward, or the service or the program forward. So getting everybody kind of on the same page with the same vision, marching in the same direction. For medical, it was definitely, you have a few people who have expertise. And so, you know, trying to find people that have the medical training that we were looking for the team, or firemen, or people who can provide psychological care. You know, looking for those licensed people to supplement the other people on our team. And so, Mac, there, thank you. The other thing that I think we found in in my area was lack of clear policies and procedures. And the policies and procedures that started as we grew, we needed to change those policies and procedures, and stick with the policies and procedures and change them as they needed to be changed as we grew. So, and then lack of committed team members was also an issue for the emergency service department. So So that's starting a new program. Obviously, if you have an old program, but you still don't have clear policies and procedures or practices in place, you need to think about those before the next burn happens. Because if everybody knows what the policy is, you've done all that thinking ahead of time, it really, really helps make things go smooth. Once you get on site, you know what you're doing, you know how it should, how you think it should happen, according to your policies and procedures, and it can keep you on track. The other thing, I've seen programs that get too broad or they don't have a clear-cut mission. So just making sure that you know what your mission is and what your service is and how you're going to provide it. So personal issues that can interfere with or cause you to end up in a burnout situation is anxiety. Anxiety about failure. You know, everybody who becomes a lead does it because in their heart they want to contribute to this event and they want to make things better. And so there's a lot of anxiety sometimes about failure and not having things go the way you anticipate them, and that can result in people attempting to control everything. There can be a need for validation, and so you start injecting yourself into all the different areas. So, and then self-importance, thinking that things will fall apart if you're not there. And so sometimes I get that sense that people feel that way, and it's like, really, if I step away from that team's still going to carry on. Which I'm really happy about, because any of us can be gone any day, and I want that team to be sustainable. So let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. So just to kind of give you an idea, I'm going to talk a little bit about, Lake Supplier. And we started, actually, I think we started in 2008. I wasn't around at that time, but the burn report is dated for 2009, says we had 546 attendees, and you can see that we've grown over time. And so part of, some of our history with starting small is what then as we grew became boundary issues and overwork problems for us. You want to move on to the next slide? So ESD started basically, medical was on a site and everybody who did medical camped with medical. So everybody was there. And did it work when you had 400 participants or 500 participants? Yes, there was medical people available. People got care. But as the event grew and we got more and more team members, the site was beginning to get overrun. People would congregate at the medical tent, and that kind of became a party zone. So we really needed to change. And there was a very astute board member who said to myself and to some of the other leads, you need to look a little more professional. And I really took that board member's statement to heart. And, we talked about how we could change our team, and he tried to get input from the team. And there were a lot of diverse ideas, and there were a lot of people who were very happy with the way things were and didn't want to change. So, change can be hard for people. So you have to have the value that everybody needs dedicated time off. So, and I value my time off to play at Lake Supplier so much. I want to carve out that time for myself. And I think every single person who goes there, and especially the leads and the board members, they need to have that time off to really enjoy the burn. For my department, is being considerate about people's professional licenses is really important. I don't want to have to provide medical care if I've had anything to drink, if I'm impaired in any way. And I think protecting people's licenses outside of the event is an important thing to consider for the event if you want professionals with licenses on your team. So one of the things we tried to do first was move the culture from like everybody in the medical tent all the time, was that when it's your shift, you show up and you show up ready to work. That means you have your shirt on and you're well rested and your tummy's full. And so just, some of those things that seem kind of things your mom would tell you, or common sense, like, hey, we need to do this. Really pushing the idea that when you're on duty, you wear your shirt. When you're off duty, you take that shirt off and you go out into the community and have fun. You become part of the problem, but please don't show back up at the medical tent. That became a message that we sent quite a few. We send that message out over and over and over, and I feel like I repeated it over and over back when we made that change. We did on-site institute what we called the waiting room bar, and the idea with that is that we could get most of the people who lived on the site to party in the waiting room, where the actual medical tent where people were getting care would kind of just have the people on duty. And so hoping that idea would help move people away from the front of the medical tent, which unfortunately that did not work out. People still migrated back to the front of the medical tent and really like to hang out there. And so it just became the kind of always at work sort of, you're always at work because you're living at work sort of situation. So it was finally made the decision that we would have to move camping off-site from where the medical tent was located. And that was a discussion that happened over quite a few months, talking about that. What would it look like? Would we lose people when we moved the volunteers down the road to different locations? And I'm happy to say that we had a lot of grumbling, but nobody actually left the team. So we were able to retain the people on our team. So the other thing with having people moved off site is we instituted a CoLead and a shift lead. So we have CoLeads within the emergency medical department, and we have shift leads. And our shift leads operate in 12-hour shifts. And when I'm a shift lead, I show up, at the first hour when people are checking in, make sure everybody showed up, make sure they know who I am, make sure they know how to contact me, make sure they've signed in and they have everything and they're set for their shift. If somebody doesn't show up, I'll stay and work that 4 hours if I need to. But usually people show up for their shifts, people sign in, they're set to go, and I kind of go back and do my, thing at my campsite or wherever I want to be. And then at the next 4-hour shift change, I will check in again and make sure the off-going staff haven't had any problems that they need to talk about, and that oncoming staff arrive, get signed in, and get set up for a successful shift. And then at the end of the shift, I go back and make sure. So we have nurses and usually firemen, paramedics who have been with ESD for a while, are shift leads. And we try to get a nice mix of staffing. So I'll talk about that a little bit later on, but I'll talk about it right now. So staffing wise, we do have the shift leads like I talked about, and then we have our licensed volunteers, and then we have our non-licensed volunteers. And we always, when we schedule, we open up our schedule, we have specific slots so we can get a nice mix of, these are firemen, these are nurses, these are people who, have just basic CPR training, which are very valuable to our team. But we try to get a nice mix of different levels of licenses, non-licensed, and make sure that mixture is really good. We let people sign up for the shifts that they want. If the medical lead or the ESD lead in the end has a final say on the schedule, and she can make changes to that schedule to make sure that we have a safe mix for our volunteers. So So that's kind of where we're at right now. We've got other areas that we're growing in, so it will be interesting to see what happens next year with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Mac.
Cool. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Holly. Thanks a lot. So first of all, I'm going to say it felt really good to felt really good to have been asked to be a part of this. Partially because that means that one of the techniques that I'm trying to use to avoid overwork is working, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Second, a little background and context, because I know everybody doesn't organize things the same way. For me, my DPW department evolved to be what Flipside would consider to be something like side ops, but also parking, but also something kind of like your shaven apes, and also for good measure Nexus. So that's just kind of a little bit of my portfolio. And just like any good product of evolution, it made beautiful sense every step of the way, and no sane person would build it that way. So Lancelot talked a lot about how to identify what overwork looks like, and what kind of situations that you can get into that can breed that overwork. I'm going to take a couple steps deeper and talk about the things you can do to try to get your head above water and to keep it there. So I'm going to hit a couple different layers. The first, the immediate actions that you can take to try to staunch the bleeding. Some systems approaches is a big fancy word to talk about building resilience into your decision making. Leadership and team interactions will help make more out of the effort that you're already expending. And personal accountability is about how to use accountability to yourself, to your team, your peers, community, our entire ethic to strengthen and multiply everything else that you're doing. Everything I'm about to talk about kind of works and makes sense with everything else. They all work together. Pieces of it all work together. So don't sweat it if something gets missed or overlooked. I'm going to try to focus on practical applications. Suggestions to give ideas that you can use. Also to keep me from getting too deep into the weeds, there are a couple times where I'm probably just going to reference concepts and theories that these suggestions are based on. So you can go out later and plug it into the Google machine if you want to learn more. So some immediate steps to pressure off. If you're really feeling up against it, first thing you can try to do is ranger yourself. Flame is a great thing. Everybody here, well, I'm going to assume that most people here have at least some touch point with ranger approaches. So anything that you could use to help someone else chill out in a stressful situation can be applied back to yourself to help you work through your own problems, especially finding things out and analyzing. Taking the time to do that is incredibly important. The most important meal of my burner life was probably the second year I was a lead, when my mentor scooped me up in his cart, took me back to his camp, sat my overworked ass down in a camp chair, and gave me the perfectly normal burner meal of spaghetti and rum. And he didn't let me get up until I stopped trying to help with the dishes. Taking the time to attend to your creature needs pairs really well with the time that it takes to flame a situation. So sit down, hydrate, have a snack. It will absolutely help to put things in perspective. Next, traditionally spilt milk. This is kind of two ideas squished together. Tradition is important, but past is not future. Effort that's been expended does not justify effort that doing the same thing in the future. If you see a problem, you can change it. Also, the most damaging words that you can say are, "We've always done it that way." It's no excuse. If you're running into a problem, you can change it. But also, what's done is done. Don't cry over that spilt milk. Focus on what can be changed, on what can be affected. The Wikipedia article on sunk cost is a great place to start about looking at the psychological factors that go into this and the biases that contribute to this fallacy. Sunk cost. Next, call a spade a spade. It is incredibly important to be able to take an honest inventory of yourself and your situation. This is absolutely about distinguishing mountains and molehills, things that require attention and things that can afford to be let simmer for the moment. You want to focus on safety, focus on communication. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Trust your peers, trust your teams. Honest analysis is just as important if some supplies get ruined as it is when you suddenly and horribly realize that you've wildly overpromised something. Believe me, we have all been there. We get it. Attached to this is the need to speak plainly and clearly. De-jargonize what you're saying, especially when you're talking to fresh volunteers. We have all built processes to do what we do, and some of us have built these processes even into like almost rituals. And that's actually really, really important to team building and to the morale of your team at the burn. But especially if things are going sideways, it's really important to communicate like clarity, communicate clearly, communicate your purpose to your team, and not to get it all caught up in jargon or a specific way of doing things. Jumping back to the idea that we've all been there, success is not a feat of will or a feat of heroic effort. It's a feat of collaboration. So if you take any conceits about Titanic individuals holding up the heavens, wash that nonsense out of your head, and you can look around and see that most of your successful peers have all built networks of interreliance. If someone is offering to help, say yes. We all help each other because we're all here for the same goal. So I will say it again, it's okay to ask for help. It is okay to take help, especially in our community of doers. Once you get that help, remember that burns are not the ideal environment for purists and for perfectionists. This is a very intentionally messy endeavor. So a solution isn't probably going to look like what it would in your mind if you could draw it up, from a blank page. But that doesn't make it an invalid solution. It might not look like what you imagined, especially if you're pulling in help. But if it works, I seem to recall a saying about gift horses and mouths. So to recap, ranger yourself, eat your spaghetti and rum, don't cry over spilt milk, call a spade, and take yes for an answer. Those are some core ways to deal with this crisis, but nobody really wants to live in panic mode all the time. So let's talk about some better ways to deal with the next crisis. This may seem like a non sequitur, but have goals. Have goals. Write them down. Write your goals down. That makes them more real. It gives you something to refer back to. It gives you something to look at. It gives you a North Star around which to navigate. Also, Google Docs are free. Like, they're wherever you want them to be. So you don't really have an excuse. Explicit goals for the short term and for the longer term will help you order your actions and organize your thoughts. If you're having trouble approaching this, you can try to identify like one thing that you want to fix, however big or however small it might be, something that you have the ability to influence. That's a goal. Take something else again, however big or small, that you have the ability to improve or to take up to the next level. That's an aspirational goal. That's something to reach for. They don't need to be any fancier than that, but they will help you organize your thoughts. Also, it's really important. I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about your exit. It is an incredibly important part of your planning to think about your eventual and inevitable exit from leadership. This really forces you to centralize your thoughts on your team and forces you to think about departmental priorities. Again, something to help think about this. If you had to leave the event in 5 minutes, what would you say to your best volunteer that they didn't already know? Anything that you can think of, like if you can think of something, that's probably what you should be teaching them next. And if you can't think of anything, then they're probably at least as well trained as you were when you stepped up. And like, really, man, that's a huge feather in your hat as a lead. If they already know, like, how great a resource is that? So that next leads to plans. Plans are what you do with goals. If you have a clear idea of what you want to achieve beyond like the bare functioning of your department, then you have a framework that you can plan around. This doesn't have to be grandiose or super involved. It just has to be written down so you can refer back to it. Even the time that you spend ahead of time just thinking about your goals and thinking about your plans is useful. You can, like, there are so many resources that you have that you can tap for this. Ask around. Other people will have input on timelines, on suppliers, on ways to communicate with your team. You're guaranteed to learn something from your peer leads. So tap that resource. That's one of the reasons we're doing this whole safety side, because we need to be able to share information and ask around. Think about making bigger changes in your department. Some best practice on scope is to think about designers who successfully version systems. Well, it's kind of a rule of thirds. Designers who build, like who version, who improve systems, carry over about a third of an existing plan, a third of an existing department completely untouched. They'll make tweaks and improvements on maybe about another third, and like real big serious changes never encompass more than about a third of an entire system if you're looking at manageable transition. So if you're trying to get an idea of how big to plan, the rule of thirds might be really useful to think about. Also, it's really important to remember to set aside time to do this, and you have to schedule time to do this. Having your burn fresh in mind helps. So I try to draft my plans of what I'm going to be doing around the time of the afterburn report. I go through my on-site notes and my off-season notes and my memories, and like I just get to it. Which actually reminds me, like any good creative, keep a notebook or a sketch pad or a note app or whatever. I always have my portfolio binder with me on site. My system is that everything I touch goes into my binder, and then it gets sorted at the end of the day. That way I don't lose contacts, I don't lose receipts, I don't lose contracts, I don't lose notes. Important stuff gets saved and copied, maybe make another little note on it, hit it with a highlighter so it'll catch my eye later. But all of that helps go back into updating and planning more. The upshot of all of that is that once you've taken the time to set your goals and build your plan, you have a really clear idea of how to approach everything else. And having a clear idea on how to approach everything else will really help prevent the feelings of tension and overwork. This preparation adds so much to your chill and to your resilience. Again, to keep out of the weeds, there are full fat resources on strategic planning for nonprofits if you want a more comprehensive treatment on this. Again, the internet is full of it. So a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this point, and legitimately, there is no one best way to lead at a burn. But if you're having trouble keeping your head above water, may I humbly submit the following. Leadership at a burn should be service leadership, which for some people is going to sound like a contradiction, but this is a way to build useful boundaries and build better decision making, not because it makes the work go away. Nothing you're going to do is going to make the work go away, but it will help you clarify the role that you play, what your role is. You can make better decisions on when and where and how to engage if you have a clear idea of what your internal rules of engagement are. I'm going to cover these quickly, and there are all kinds of resources on Google. First, your service to your team and your team's service to the burn should be priorities. If you make a conscious effort to take the ego element out of being in charge, if you take that out of the equation, your mission gets clearer. Modeling how you act and how you approach different situations will set the norm for your team. Your team will emulate your ethic. Like knowing where those boundaries are tells everyone else where your boundaries are. And it might take a while to let that get settled in. But like I said earlier, I was really happy. Well, yeah, like that's one of my core techniques. I know, like I show by my behavior where my boundaries are. People know that, people recognize that. That's why I even got asked to do this. Next, empowering your team. Letting the leash out for responsible volunteers builds mutual trust and confidence. Taking that leash off demonstrates and demands that trust. Your team will not flourish without this confidence and this empowerment. You will always feel overwhelmed unless and until you unclench your fingers. Next, clearing the path for your team to do the job. This might be the most relevant bit as it relates to boundaries and burnouts. Being a manager versus being a doer. As a lead, your role cannot be exactly the same as your team's. It is a trap to think that you need to be elbows deep in the guts of every situation. It is a trap to think that you need personal and intimate knowledge of every little detail or the wheels will fall off. It is a trap to think that fire needs to be fought with fire, that like turning up the frequency and somehow doing more will let you cover all the bases and get to all the things. No. These are the elements of burnout that you have the most direct control over that you can alleviate. From this perspective, your options are chill out or burnout. I don't really love using military analogies, but as a lead, you are a field marshal, not a GI. Both are soldiers, but one has the experience and the perspective to direct others where they are most useful. We are all burners and we are all volunteers, but in leadership, your primary role is directing traffic, making sure the right people are in the right place at the right time. If you have a team of volunteers around you, your place is not in the fray. My job as DPW lead is making sure that all the infrastructure is all in place and it's all safe. I can't do that if I'm out building shade structures personally. Focus on planning and coordination. Let your team do the work on site. Next, giving successes to your teams, taking failures on yourself. When somebody shines, make sure they see it, reflect it back out. When somebody screws up, one, everybody knows that's going to happen from time to time. So like, don't sweat it out of proportion. And two, it's what action you take afterward, which really matters. Improving training, tweaking procedures, take responsibility, apologize to people who need to be apologized to. To your peers, this looks way better than buck passing. To your team, you have just instantly shown them that you have their back. And that's the kind of action that really moves the needle on morale. Boundaries. Boundaries are the protection that keeps the chaos at bay and helps keep your ego in check. It works both directions. So if you have a strategy and a plan and your actions match up with that, you are making a statement to your peers and to your teams about how they can expect you to engage. Think about the simple statement, I don't smoke. It is a simple statement of a simple boundary, and unless you're 12, your friends and peers will respect that. There might be a transition period and an adjustment period if you're making a change, so you're going to have to repeat it. Like, it's not going to be a one and done process. No, now you've got to check in with Deary first, then go catch up with Showman. Like, you're going to find yourself saying things like that if you start to put in these boundaries, but eventually they will start to hold. Nobody ever knew from day one how much they could or couldn't do. And that level is that's no less dependent upon the environment than it is upon yourself. Okay, so do I want to go from here? There, yeah. Sorry, one moment. No one element really can dictate terms on boundaries and environment. There are a couple different factors involved. There's, I apologize, I absolutely got lost in my notes. All right, well, tell you what, we can pick up from here. So, okay, yeah, let's talk about how boundaries are co-created and how everything can work together. Since no one element can dictate any terms, nothing can also, like in that same way, nothing can be sidelined and completely ignored. A healthy sense of self-confidence is really important, but if your ego is crowding out the needs of the burn and of the team, you're letting everybody down, and everybody can see that. If there is a problem, ask yourself, is the priority getting the job done, or is it that I'm right? Like, is being right your priority? And if that is, again, you're kind of letting everybody down. It's not always easy to see that distinction. And again, going back to, like, everybody here has some Ranger touch point. The Rangers have a much more sophisticated way of talking about, like, keeping ego out of the situation. So I'd point you to them as a good resource for that. I think finally the huggiest, feeliest bit of anything that I'm going to say this morning, the environment you help create by engaging earnestly and in good faith won't be perfect, but it is broadcasting a model for a better way. I said earlier that, yeah, that this really was a vindication. Holding healthy boundaries and having everyone know that these are my boundaries, that's recognized. And that works for everybody. Think about how much work that does for you. I'm personally, like, I'm never not busy, and I'm always going to do my best to be on site, be like where I need to be and get the job done. But my team and my peers know they can miss me with the bullshit because I don't take the bait. And I got to that point by setting goals, by building a plan, by sticking to that plan, by trusting the team, and by putting them first. You get enough people thinking like this, and sometimes you can actually take the day off and go to the burn for once in a while. I think that's all I have to say on that. So I'm really happy, and I know Holly is too. We would be really happy to hear some thoughts and ideas. A final point, self-care is absolutely not optional. Like, we've got to do this, because if we don't, we're going to be crazy. So thank you. But yeah, lots of thoughts and ideas would be nice. I'm going to go ahead and stop the slide now. Ta-da. All right, yeah, there we go.
Mac and Cheese, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So I think this happens, this is awesome also for personal life and in the professional setting, because I know I struggle with that in a professional setting and boundaries. My question is, and I'm sure there are many others, and I've seen this happen, I'm burnt out. I don't know who else is going to do this, but I can't now. And people still perpetuate that. I have to do this because no one else is here. Or they say, I don't want to call this person because they were just on shift for 24 hours. And so there isn't necessarily like a backup person to take over. So what has been y'all's experience with, I'm sorry, I can't, and just walking away when there's not necessarily someone else to take over?
For me, that's absolutely, like, it's triage. It's looking at what absolutely needs to be done and what can afford to be put off. I understand that there are some situations where, like, yeah, this can't be put off. And fortunately, I've never had to be up for 24 straight hours, but, like, I absolutely know peers who have felt that way. But for me, that's one of those places and times where, like, building more robust systems has, like, helped that, like, making sure that there are enough, that you do have the depth on the bench. Some things there's nothing else that can be done for it but to, like, dig deep if it has to be done. But that's the kind of situation that we're trying to avoid, right?
Yeah, I think the shift.
Oh, go ahead.
I think the shift leads have really helped with that in our department, because you know that there's somebody else that's actually responsible for 12 hours. And, if you're, and the next person's on for 12, and then when it's your turn, you're on for that 12. So, I know I can go out and have a lot of fun on this night because that other person's in charge and I don't have to worry about it. So that has just made a world of difference in our group.
Yeah, let me underline that, because for as many different arms as my department has, with me, Easy is a co-lead. So there's the two of us at the top of the pyramid. We've got two other veterans who could legitimately run the department if they had to. One ex-lead, one who it was either me or him to step up. So we got kind of four people at the top level, and we all share a lot of that top level load for lead of the day. Each of my departments, each of my wings has a lead, has a responsible person. In our emergency plan, two of those could be tapped to direct the entire department if we had to. We have built a very, very robust system. On site in total, I'm responsible for 150 volunteers. Some of probably 50 or 60 at any given time are actively working during build. So there's no way that you can directly manage all of that yourself. So having a couple layers in between you, or at least some redundance in between you and any crisis that comes up, is helpful, because that's just more people that experience can build into, and redundance can build into.
One thing that you can do at the department lead level is try to split up your shifts so that, say, the medical lead and the fire lead are not on at the same time. Mm-hmm. So if you do run out of people on the bench and it runs thin, perhaps my medical lead has some fire training and can start marshaling resources until, some senior fire folks can get out of bed or get their shit together. So yeah, just try much planning you can in advance at that level. Unfortunately, we can't spread out the bench very well. When you ask your volunteers to sign up for shifts, they're just going to pick what time that they don't want to be at a certain party, or they want to be at a certain party and they're not going to be, available. So just sometimes you just got to wing it and work with the resources you have. Even your LLC board members can step up sometimes. You have an actual on duty or somebody at that level.
Hey, Steve here. I'd like to throw in one more consideration here, is that anytime anyone is looking at a scenario like this of, you've been up for too long, there's nobody else to take over. I see a lot of focus here on, building the layers, but one other fundamental question that everybody needs to be able to do is answer, how vital is this? If I did just walk away right now, is the event going to grind to a halt or not? And a lot of times the answer is no, nothing's going to happen. Maybe something won't happen exactly on schedule, and that's just fine.
Jackpot.
Turn on your mic, Jackpot. There you go.
It follows up really nicely on what Scuba was saying. If you do that honest risk assessment, and then if you're finding yourself in that position where there's nobody else to take over that load and you're feeling bad about that, that means afterwards you need to have a conversation with your team about then putting those systems in place, or if the values just don't support what you're trying to accomplish. If you're the only one championing something and being there, that either shows that your community is not supporting what you're doing, or that you need to then have that conversation about building those systems.
And just for context, Jackpot's one of our boardies at Lakes of Fire, so thank you.
Yeah, one problem I've seen occur, Nurse Lancelot and Mac, you may want to help me answer this. You have that line that goes from shift to shift, from department to department. They want to wear every color shirt. How do y'all deal with that?
Go ahead, Ollie.
You know, it is so tempting to want to work. I would love to be a perimeter ninja. I would love to be a greeter. I would love to. And so personally for myself, what I do is say to myself, I can do that once I step down as a lead position. And those, you know, I have got my spots kind of eyeballed out where I think I want to end up volunteering, because they just look like so much darn fun. It's so exciting. We have had volunteers that are spread too thin. They're volunteering for other departments. That doesn't happen so much with the licensed people, because they tend to stick with what they know best, you know, and they want to offer nursing, or they want to be the doctor, or they want to be, you know, the psychological support, because that's what they're really good at. So we don't have a lot of problem with that. When we have the people with basic first aid that are volunteering for us, sometimes we'll get them volunteering in multiple departments. And as long as they're showing up for their shift and they're well rested, you know, I think that diversity and that cross training is great. But yeah, people can get so excited they spread themselves thin.
Very much like the same thing that Lancelot was talking about, her licensed people. Like my core build crew, we're on site from like 3 or 4 days ahead of gate. So like they're all going to get their hours in. It's like the other crews, like my parking crew, they're never going to like, I'm never going to have just somebody who all they do is parking. So we try. Something that's been really helpful for us is we have learned to coordinate with our volunteer department. For the last couple of years, they've run a really successful program of like coordination with other departments for walk-on volunteers. Mm-hmm. So anytime that we do have people who burn out or wander away, float off into the burn, like we coordinate very closely with them to like restaff to get more bodies in places where we need them. Because like we just have to build that in. We have to build that knowledge in, that like there are going to be people with other interests. There are going to be people with other priorities. So, I mean, that's kind of the other side of what you were asking, but I think that dovetails in with what Lancelot was talking about.
One other question, have you ever created a flow chart of like, or do you have like a set of, not necessarily a flow chart, but a set of questions for how people to determine if they're overextending themselves, or to how to like help somebody check in? Because like, it's like, okay, you need to set your boundaries, but if I'm not a boundary setter and I haven't been, how do I know that I'm crossing my boundaries?
That's actually not a bad idea. I'm trying to think of like what point that would come into play. Like if that's something that I've got on like on the back of my lamb, you know, next to the flame reminder and the lost child protocol, you know, like if I can see a fellow lead who's like crying quietly in their cart and sidle up and like check my card, that might be useful. Oh God, yes. My off-duty button. I have a big button that I wear on my hat when I'm not on duty. I have a big off-duty button. Thank you, Jackpot.
You know, I think that's a great question. And I really think, you know, talking about it like at the noon meeting, we have a noon meeting every day with all the leads. I think that's a great idea to talk about, you know, and, you know, what are the signs of burnout and how do you approach another lead that you think is heading that direction on a freight train and how to help them get off that train. So I think that's an excellent idea.
Like my thoughts were, like a Flipside or Ranger HQ is also kind of the hub where everybody checks in, and like maybe just on the board in HQ as like a self-check, like, okay, I'm coming on as khaki, you know, not as like a overall lead, but just a shift lead. But it's, am I ready to do this, or do I need to step away, or a way that maybe as khaki, I see that the lead of another department's burning out, or the fire lead sees that khaki is burnt out. And it's a way to, I guess, unbiasedly walk through, and then it doesn't have that sense of like, I'm judging you, or, you know, it's what's the word I'm looking for? Formalized, it's streamlined, it's consistent in kind of an expectation. And I would have no idea how to do this. I don't want to like dump it on somebody. But like, how can that help us hold ourselves and others accountable, but be what's like kind about it?
I kind of have a mental checklist that almost consistently 2 hours before I have a shift, and my shifts are usually 12 hours, that I go through that at the 2 hour mark before I'm getting ready to work. Like, you know, and basic things. Have I had enough sleep? Do I need to eat something? Have I stopped drinking? Have I, you know, so there's this list that I go through that I know it in my mind, and my husband can tell you what it is, but have I written it down and shared it with others? No. And that's, you know, one of the techniques I use.
Should you ever write it down? I think that there are folks that would be happy to see it and build on it.
Yeah, I think we can share.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
haven't, but you know what? That absolutely fits with my philosophy. Like that's part of the plan. That can be part of the way. Again, like the core ethic behind all of this for me is, if you think about it ahead of time, that's one less thing that you have to think about in the moment. And that's the core for me. So I absolutely can make that part of the pre-process. Well, so I see a lot of people are starting to filter out. So, I mean, I'm happy to sit around and chat.
I was going to mention that Google Drive, I recently found, has a free mind map plugin that allows you to really easily create maps between things. And that's been a really useful tool that I found recently to help me kind of organize thoughts.
It's a good tip. Thank you.
I really appreciate this presentation. And I think just setting up some sort of boundary, like pre-expectations, just kind of to help maybe build, and I'm nowhere in the, I'm like here in the hierarchy of burns, but just a tool to get kind of a reassessment. And also I think it would help the people who over volunteer step back and go, you know what, this is something that it's okay for me to let go of, and like maybe in a way help with, but it seems like a really good front end setup to kind of alleviate problems, because y'all know what your checklists are, but this way you don't have to keep going through them. You don't have to be present to help someone else walk through the boundaries. So I really like this. It's like, it just makes